This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
People savour their daily coffee, be it one or multiple. So it's nice to participate in that, and it's nice to have an accompanying story that we go through annually to produce the coffees enjoyed.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Jemal Murat founded Australian coffee company Jack Murat, named after his grandfather and co-owned with his brothers and father. Jack Murat grows coffee beans in North Queensland on land that was previously used for tobacco and annual crops. With coffee, they've found a project that's promising enough to engage the whole family in a lifetime commitment to the farm, the crop, and a unique high-quality product that he hopes will be enjoyed in cafes around the country.
I'm Jemal Murat. My job within the company is to sort of represent us in all manners post sort of farming itself, so the less difficult part of the job. I've been involved with the family operation since 2014, since our first planting, essentially. So it's been a long time coming, but now we're more or less on the start line, ready to sell our coffee and introduce it to the Australian market. Jack Murat the story starts with my grandfather, Jemal Murat, who was an early immigrant to Australia from Albania. He moved over here in the 1920s. And on moving here, he sort of forged a career in agriculture in sort of a, pioneering sense in North Queensland. And he established his first farm then, and in establishing that, he established a bit of a family tradition working the land. He has since passed, but my father and his two brothers continue to operate his properties. Initially, when the sort of agricultural industry was established in North Queensland, tobacco was sort of the predominant, crop that was growing. That obviously has long passed. Our own property then went through a period, almost a holding pattern, if you like, whereby we grew an array of different crops, annually. But the family had always been searching for something to truly, throw themselves into, a larger project, something, sort of the finest crop that our farm could support. So that sort of holding pattern went on for quite a number of years. We entertained coffee, given the sort of commitment it requires in terms of establishing a plantation, all the associated investment, and just a life commitment, right? My uncles and my father are no spring chickens. So in order for us to pursue this, it really required almost a sort of unified family commitment and a unified commitment from myself and, my cousins and my brother, etc. Once that was forthcoming, the commitment was made to grow coffee.
Jack Murat's origins are bound up in stories of immigration, identity, and in a family's search for the crop that would carry their tale forward.
In 2014, we established Jack Murat. Reason being is my grandfather, when he first moved to Australia, he was quickly renamed Jack. So we thought it apt to sort of, have a bit of a nod of honour, if you like, to him and to his pioneering ways. And we thought it made sense given, that the coffee should bear the name of the property's first farmer. So that's where Jack Murat came about. Our first coffee planting was in 2014, so around 7 years has since passed. So the trees are now well established, and we've had an initial couple of harvests, and now we're eagerly introducing the product to the Australian market.
Coffee is an annual crop, eventually, but it takes years to establish seedlings and nurture them until they fruit. Deciding to take this path took a lot of planning, commitment and conversation. But in a country that loves drinking coffee, it was the idea of locally grown beans that gave the Murat family passion and purpose.
It's a tremendous commitment, right? Like a seedling is planted and it takes, 4 or 5 years to bear any fruit. So, and then, you need all the accompanying equipment and, you need to establish your own processing plant. So it's quite a real and significant commitment. The process we went through, we just surveyed the industry, if you like, our own property, the environment we operate in, the prospects of the Australian market, and coffee just made sense. Like, we sit within the world's bean belt, so within the tropics, so the climate and the conditions are well suited to grow coffee. So that made perfect sense. And then you overlay the prospects of it. We've got a phenomenally vibrant Australian industry with limited to minimal locally grown coffee. So it just made perfect sense to us. The environment, the conditions of our farm then matched with the vibrant Australian coffee industry. And it just seemed like a perfect fit. And I certainly think it is, and it sort of, injected the family with a sense of passion and purpose. And unlike some of the other crops we'd been growing in this sort of interim period, we now have the opportunity to introduce our product directly to our consumers, to our customers, unlike some of the other, crops we had been growing, whereby, the process is often opaque and distant. Coffee permits us to be a genuine producer, and in doing so, it's sort of reinvigorated and unified the family in its pursuit.
Located in North Queensland, along the Great Dividing Range, the tropical environment suits coffee, and Jemal hopes that the resulting crop will reflect its volcanic soil, monsoonal rains, elevation, and unique terroir.
The location, Cairns is the nearest sort of larger city. So it's west of Cairns, about an hour and a half. The nearest township is Mareeba, so it sits just outside of Mareeba. The tropics are important from a coffee producing perspective because of conditions. The rainfall, the rainfall is good. The elevation is sound. The soils are rich to sustain the coffee. So all of these sort of factors come together and create almost a perfect environment to grow coffee. We're sort of wedged almost between the rainforest and the outback savanna. So it's quite a very unique environment, if you like. And coffee is all about the uniqueness of environment. It's assumed that coffee bears the flavors of its environment. And given when we are in the uniqueness, and given Australia in terms of its production represents a tiny proportion of the world's production, it's that unique environment which, manifests itself in our product ultimately. The soil itself is rich volcanic soil. The climate is tropical. We have monsoonal rains most of the summer, so it commences around now and extends to February generally. The elevation, it's elevated, so we're at more or less the highest point of elevation along the Great Dividing Range. Again, it's thought that elevation plays a part as well in terms of coffee growing and the ultimate outcome you achieve. Again, relative to some other places in the world, naturally we're more distant to the equator relative to some other coffee growing regions, which again the elevations are very high, but we still have sufficient elevation. And if we're to draw parallels, probably some of the Brazilian producers would have somewhat similar conditions, but again, noting Australia is Australia and unique in its own right.
You might drink coffee every day, but you may not be as familiar with the careful, arduous process of turning a coffee cherry into a cafe latte.
Unlike other fruits, if you like, when it comes to growing coffee is grown on a tree, on a shrub. It has a layer of flesh in the skin, what we often do, we harvest that, and then the idea with coffee, as I said, unlike other fruits, is you remove the fruit, you remove the skin, and you just keep the bean itself. So it goes through a sort of process to remove that skin and to remove the flesh attached to the seed. So we go through a particular process, and you'll find different processes across the world in terms of how you go about doing that. We have our own, and as I sort of referenced earlier, we've leaned on sort of processes quite dominant in Colombia. So we go through that process, and then the seed itself is dried. So they go into dryers, or they go out onto, like patios, and they're sun-dried. And then they're sun-dried to a particular moisture level, and then they're stored and distributed to roasters. And then roasters do, their craft, and they roast it to the best of their ability in a bid to, showcase the seed or the bean in the, as well as they possibly can.
Growing coffee has been a great way to build relationships with local roasters, those who turn green beans into roasted beans that are ready to grind, brew and enjoy.
Yeah, so that's one of the real perks or benefits of coffee, is those relationships. And again, as I touched on earlier, the Australian roaster scene is, world leading in that sense. So it's been wonderful to meet and greet a lot of people in the roasting industry in Australia. So the way we're doing it, it's very much relationship driven. It's introducing the product to roasters, and then they have an opportunity to assess it and assess the prospects of it. In our own case, we partnered with Nick Theodore. Nick has a long history in the roasting industry. He used to head up the coffee program at Reuben Hills, which is quite a prominent cafe in Sydney, and sort of one of the leaders in coffee and early adopters, in the specialty scene in Australia. So Nick's been a tremendous asset in terms of, bringing that craft to the roasting piece for us. And Nick certainly sees phenomenal prospects in our farm and in the coffee we're growing. So that's been a lot of fun, and the tinkering that comes with roasting. Right, there's an array of profiles that you can roast your coffee. There's a whole spectrum of roast profiles. Seeing the nuances across that spectrum has been a lot of fun. And then seeing the roasters, purchase a coffee and then subsequently introduce it to their own customer bases has been a lot of fun as well.
Australians usually love local produce, but there are still a few hurdles to ensure Australians prize locally grown coffee beans. How does Jemal tackle this coffee cultural cringe?
The dynamics we face being an Australian producer is somewhat odd, in the sense that our coffee almost sells itself overseas. Yet domestically, it's somewhat shunned, if I'm honest with you. So my intention, though, is to really have a local product that meets the expectations of the local market. So, so although we may find interest overseas, we're very committed still to carve out a local presence as well. It's been going really well to date. It's been going really well. We recently just concluded a collaboration with a Melbourne roaster called Zest. So they're quite big across the eastern seaboard. So Zest, they have a real hands-on approach to partnerships when it comes to farmers. So what we did with Zest is they came up to the farm for a few weeks, and we established a micro lot program. So we ran about 10 different alternative processes over our crop, and then in doing so, the intent is to then showcase that to more or less the pointy end of the coffee industry, to show them that Australian coffee done at its best can taste like this. And the early signs are that we've achieved some really great outcomes, like some really solid scoring coffees that could, sit there confidently in the mix with, fine producers the world over. So I think that's a real milestone for us. And that will certainly demonstrate that Australia can certainly grow great coffee.
Traceability is something that consumers are placing more and more importance on, especially when it comes to coffee. a product that often prompts tricky discussions around purchasing ethics and fair trade. How does Jack Murat respond to that with their coffee, marketing, and pricing?
We're all about localism, and our sort of vision is to carve out a truly traceable product from our farm in North Queensland to the consumers across Australia. And, you know, certainly localism features strongly in our relationships with our customers. I think it's, you know, increasingly across the Australian landscape is something that customers and consumers are seeking to prioritise. And they're prioritising without any, you know, trade-off in quality. So, yeah, that complete traceability from our farm to our consumers, to our customers, is a phenomenal asset, and one which, you know, most other coffee companies and roasters can't necessarily replicate like we can. So yeah, that's a real key feature for us, and one that, you know, we warmly sort of promote to our customers, and one which, you know, we want to have an open sort of annual program, if you like, whereby our customers, you know, have the ability to come visit our farm, have the ability to participate in some manner, have the ability to take those stories and then convey them to their customers across Australia. In terms of the economic side, yeah, that's certainly been an impediment to the establishment of the Australian industry, and that's probably why it's not as advanced as other industries here, is the economics have always been somewhat challenging. You know, the coffee the world over is often picked by hand. To achieve that in Australia is very challenging, and it would compromise the economics of doing such. However, the advent of, you know, certain technologies which we can adapt to the coffee industry, like mechanical harvesting, you know, color sorting, just enhanced sorting generally, sort of allows us to overcome some of those hurdles when it comes to the cost of production. So yeah, we're certainly doing that. And what we're noticing now is production costs the world over are on the rise. And, you know, that's perhaps somewhat distorted given COVID impacts on logistics and freight. But I still think what we'll find, and maybe to the point you made earlier around climate change, is perhaps we are in a trend now of having increasing global prices in coffee. So I think the gap between the cost of us producing coffee and the cost of importing coffee is perhaps closing.
Family farming is always emotional. What does it feel like to be working with your brothers and father in this way, and how do they see the future?
Coffee, I feel, has injected us with a real sense of purpose, and, you know, it's unified the family in this endeavour. Coffee, given it is a discerning crop, you know, we are starting to take a tremendous amount of pride in, you know, everything we do day to day and the ultimate outcome that we achieve with coffee. So it's been lovely, right? Like, I've always had close bonds with my uncles, my father, but the pursuit of coffee is just, you know, added to that bond. The rate in which we speak to each other has increased, you know, to multiple times a week versus perhaps, you know, once a month. So it's been lovely. The family are really behind this. And again, it sows a seed for succession, right? My father and my uncles have been farming for many years now, and, you know, now we're getting to the point of my cousin who's, you know, pursued agricultural science, you know, imminently joining the family business as well. So it provides a pathway for succession and, you know, to allow that family tradition of working the land to continue. I think it's an exciting future. I think when it comes to the Australian coffee industry, we're just more or less on the start line. I think we'll find a lot of sophistication into the processing piece. I think we'll find an increasing availability of Australian coffee in the cafe industry itself. And I think we'll have a real vibrant, growing industry, you know, not just a roasting cafe industry. And I think, as sort of mentioned earlier, that localism will sort of is on the rise, I feel. And so long as we continue to execute on the quality piece, I think it's a real bright future. I love the fact that customers, enjoy your product, and they, it's I said it earlier, but it's part of everyone's sort of daily ritual, or a large part of the country's ritual, right? And we get to participate in that. And people savor their daily coffee, be it one or multiple. So it's nice to participate in that, and it's nice to grow something which, is evaluated on quite a complex quality assessment basis. The nuances, the flavors are enjoyed, and the accompanying story that we go through annually to produce a coffee is enjoyed.
The Murat family have invested time, money and emotion into their coffee business. Though it's just beginning, they're full of optimism and hope. Perhaps it is time for Australia's coffee culture to be more connected to the country's soil, water and environment to create a truly local brew. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.